The night before my wedding, I went to visit my future mother-in-law. When I left, I forgot to take my coat. I turned around to retrieve it, and right then and there I made the immediate decision to cancel the wedding. I was already halfway down the steep, rain-slicked slopes of Pacific Heights, heading toward my cramped 300-square-foot studio apartment in the Mission District when the realization hit me. A violent chill ran down my spine. It wasn't because the freezing, dense December fog of San Francisco was creeping through the cracks of my car window. It was because of that specific coat. It wasn't just a piece of clothing. It was an anchor. It was a charcoal gray, heavy cashmere shawl coat. Along the hemline, my mother had painstakingly hand-woven a subtle, cascading pattern of ocean waves, sewing every single thread with her failing eyesight, as if she were weaving her final protective blessing into the fabric. I slammed on the brakes of my Porsche. The tires locked up, letting out a sharp, agonizing screech that echoed against the wet asphalt. The headlights of the Tesla behind me flashed aggressively, and a loud, irritated horn pierced the quiet night. I awkwardly raised my hand to wave an apology through the rearview mirror, my heart hammering against my ribs, then merged into the turn lane, looping the car around like someone who had just dropped their entire soul in the middle of the street. Tomorrow was the wedding. By all accounts, I should have been at my hotel tucked into bed by 10 p.m., ensuring I got enough rest so the high-end bridal glam squad could meet me at 7 a.m. sharp. As a director of product at one of the biggest tech firms in Silicon Valley, I was used to meticulous scheduling. I needed to protect my energy, my presentation, and my dream of being a bride. Yet here I was abandoning my routine, racing back to Ethan's family luxury condo just for a coat. It sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? Disrupting the night before a $250,000 wedding for a piece of fabric. But in my heart, that cashmere coat was the final unbreakable cord, connecting me to my mother, to her memory, and to the ultimate warmth she had poured into me before her passing. I could still vividly remember her trembling hands smoothing the collar of the coat a year ago. She had smiled through her pain, her voice frail but resolute, telling me that her daughter was going to be a married woman soon, and that I should wear this to stay grounded whenever the world felt too cold. She had designed the waves to represent resilience, the ability to rise above any storm. She passed away last winter on a freezing, foggy night just like this one. When she died, I cried until my chest felt hollow, and then I buried my grief in corporate ambition. I lived like a machine. I worked 80-hour weeks, accumulated stock options, and strove to secure a legacy that would make her proud, even though she was no longer here to see it. The coat was a keepsake, her final blueprint for my survival. And it was something I absolutely could not leave behind in someone else's house, even if that house belonged to the people who were supposed to become my family tomorrow. A few minutes later, I pulled up outside the Brooks family's prestigious high-rise in downtown San Francisco. The streetlights cast a pale, sickly yellow glow through the heavy mist, and the ocean wind rustled through the manicured trees outside the lobby like a harsh, mocking whisper. I stepped out of the car, the sharp click of my designer heels echoing dryly against the pavement. Catching my reflection in the tinted glass doors of the lobby, I paused. My hair was styled in flawless, glossy, old Hollywood waves. My lips were painted a sophisticated, dusty rose, and my eyeliner was sharp enough to cut glass. A girl about to be a bride, I told myself, taking a deep, stabilizing breath. Madelyn, calm down. Tomorrow is the happiest day of your life. Just get the coat and go. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the penthouse suite. In the mirrored walls of the enclosure, I watched myself practice a smile. It wasn't a radiant, joyful smile, but a forced, calculated one, the kind of smile I used in high-stakes boardrooms to reassure investors when a product launch was going off the rails. I was treating my own wedding like a corporate merger, trying to convince myself that the unease in my gut was just stage fright. For tomorrow's ceremony, I had engineered everything to perfection, treating it as the foundation for a brand new life. I had picked out my haute couture wedding dress with my mother just 3 months before she entered hospice. It cost $15,000. My mom had gasped at the price tag, her eyes wide. I had laughed, kissed her forehead, and told her that I was only doing this once, and I wanted to look like a vision. She had smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, and whispered that her daughter finally knew how to value herself. Ethan's mother, Victoria, had insisted on booking the reception venue at a historic estate in Napa Valley very early on, ensuring we put down a massive non-refundable deposit to lock it in. But the title to our future marital home, a stunning multi-million-dollar penthouse in Pacific Heights, was entirely in my name. It was a spacious, light-filled unit overlooking the bay, situated in one of the most exclusive zip codes in the country. To afford the down payment alone, I had scraped together 6 years of my aggressive tech bonuses, liquidated a significant portion of my RSUs, and added the inheritance my mother had left from her estate. Ethan had been so incredibly gentle and supportive during the closing process. He had looked into my eyes, stroked my hair, and told me it was perfectly fine if the deed was solely in my name because we were entering a lifetime partnership. "What's mine is yours, Maddy, and what's yours is mine," he had murmured against my skin. "A piece of paper doesn't change that." And I had believed him. I had believed him with all the blind, unyielding faith of a woman who wanted so desperately to be loved, anchoring my heart to a 5-year relationship that I thought was my safe harbor. 5 years ago, I met Ethan Brooks at a high-profile tech symposium in South of Market. I had just been promoted to senior product manager, navigating the aggressive male-dominated waters of Silicon Valley, and he was a charismatic founder pitching a fledgling AI startup. That night, after the keynote addresses, a sudden downpour hit the city, trapping a crowd of us under the awning of the convention center. Ethan had stepped forward, offering me half of his oversized umbrella and a warm, disarming smile that felt like a spring breeze cutting through the brisk San Francisco chill. He didn't talk about valuations or burn rates. He asked about my favorite books and listened with an intensity that made me feel like the only person in the crowded room. He softened my corporate guard before I even realized I had raised it. He was charming, attentive, and seemingly unburdened by the ruthless cynicism that infected everyone else in my professional circle. The first time he introduced me to his mother, Victoria, at an upscale bistro in Presidio Heights, she had reached across the table to clasp my hands in hers. Her voice was as smooth and sweet as top-shelf bourbon. She told me she adored me instantly because I possessed a rare, genuine grit, praising the fact that I didn't rely on excessive luxury brands or superficial filters to assert my worth. She had sighed elegantly, complaining about how modern women in the city only cared about networking and social climbing, completely neglecting the sacred art of nurturing a home and a partnership. I remember sitting there, deeply moved, silently, congratulating myself on hitting the jackpot with my future in-laws. I thought I had found a matriarch who valued substance over status. As for Serafina, Ethan's younger sister, she was a university student at the time, navigating her senior year at Berkeley. She would chirp endlessly about her grand ambitions, telling me over iced lattes how much she looked up to me, how she aspired to follow in my exact footsteps to become an unstoppable, independent woman in tech. I had leaned into the role of the supportive older sister, buying her expensive career coaching seminars, gifting her designer blazers for her interviews, and editing her resume until it was flawless. Those memories flashed through my mind like a fast-forwarded movie reel as the elevator climbed higher and higher into the quiet sky. The elevator chimed a soft, crystalline sound that announced my arrival at the penthouse level. The doors slid open smoothly, revealing the pristine, minimalist hallway lit by recessed, warm-toned LED strips. I stepped out onto the plush carpet, my motion-activated footsteps waking the soft overhead lights one by one. Standing before the heavy, dark oak double doors of the Brooks residence, I took a deep, stabilizing breath. I told myself this would be a brief, seamless interaction. All I had to do was press the sleek Ring doorbell, offer a polite smile when they opened it, explain that I had left my cashmere coat on the entryway bench, retrieve it, and head straight back to my studio. It was a simple task. I raised my right hand, my index finger hovering just millimeters away from the illuminated button. But at that exact microsecond before my skin could make contact with the metal, a voice drifted through the gap beneath the heavy door. It was Victoria's voice, remarkably loud, sharp, and crystal clear. She spoke with a piercing, theatrical cadence, completely unbothered by the need for discretion, obviously under the impression that her future daughter-in-law was miles away, safely tucked into a hotel bed. "Thank God she finally left," Victoria said, her tone dripping with an icy disdain that made my blood run cold. Jesus, Ethan, the way that girl smiles makes my stomach turn. She is so utterly, painfully fake. I don't know how I kept my composure through that entire dinner. I froze in place, my hand remaining suspended in midair, my finger turning to ice. The breath caught in my throat, trapping the cold air in my lungs. Another voice chimed in immediately, melodic and youthful, but laced with a cruel, venomous sneer. It was Serafina. "Oh, come on, Mom, you deserve an Academy Award for tonight." Serafina giggled, the sound cutting through the quiet hallway like shattered glass. When you told her she looked like a vision of elegance, I almost burst out laughing right in her face. The look of pure, pathetic gratitude on her face was priceless. I swallowed hard, my throat feeling like sandpaper. A sudden, terrifying numbness washed over my limbs and my back went entirely cold against the corridor wall. A meaningless, desperate question echoed in the hollow chambers of my mind. Why would they say that? Why would they hate me so much when I have done nothing but love them? Inside the apartment, Victoria let out a loud, triumphant laugh, the unrestrained, arrogant cackle of a high-stakes poker player who had just successfully bluffed their way into a massive pot. "Of course I am acting, sweetie," Victoria said, her tone smug and self-satisfied. "If I didn't play the part of the doting mother-in-law, how else were we supposed to get our hands on that Pacific Heights penthouse? That property is a crown jewel, a multi-million-dollar asset in a prime zip code with unobstructed bay views. It's worth at least $2.5 million in this market, and her tech bonuses paid for it in cash." Serafina gasped, her voice sounding as giddy and hyperactive as a child receiving a mountain of expensive Christmas presents under the tree. "So it's official?" Serafina asked eagerly. "Once the wedding papers are signed tomorrow, that place basically belongs to Ethan, right? Forcing her to add his name to the title deed will be a cakewalk, and then we can list it for sale immediately. That will give Ethan more than enough seed money to fund his new tech incubator. Right, Mom?" My ears began to ring with a deafening, high-pitched buzz. My heart pounded so violently against my ribs that it felt like a physical assault, a brutal force threatening to shatter my skeletal structure from the inside out. Add his name to the deed, sell the penthouse, capital for his incubator. Every single word felt like a calculated heavy blow slammed directly into my chest, systematically dismantling my dignity, my history, and the 5 years of devotion I had poured into a ghost. Victoria kept talking, her tone growing increasingly casual and detached by the second, as if they were simply appraising a piece of livestock or a commercial commodity they had successfully swindled. "It's not just the real estate, Serafina," Victoria continued, the clinking of ice cubes in a crystal glass echoing clearly through the door. "I did some digging through Ethan's files. Her mother managed to secure a massive, pristine trust fund before she went into hospice last year. It's sitting there untouched. Once the marriage is legally binding, if Ethan plays his cards right, and we know how good he is at manipulating her emotions, he can easily coax that capital into a joint corporate account. Once that happens, I can finally buy you that new Range Rover you've been whining about, and we can put a hefty down payment on a luxury condo for you in Marina District." I leaned heavily against the cold, painted drywall of the hallway, my legs turning to absolute jelly. Cold sweat traced a slow, agonizing path down my spine, soaking through my silk blouse like ice water. In the theater of my mind, every sweet, nurturing word Victoria had ever spoken to me over the last 5 years instantly morphed into something utterly hideous and repulsive. Her warm smiles, her intimate hand-holding, her frequent proclamations of treating me like her own flesh and blood, it all dissolved into a cheap, disgusting theatrical performance. Inside the penthouse, the chatter continued unabated, a symphony of calculated plotting and malicious laughter ringing out with terrifying clarity. Outside, I stood entirely petrified before the threshold, my hands still suspended in the empty air, completely paralyzed, and unable to press the doorbell. I felt as if the stable earth beneath my designer heels had just been violently ripped away, flipping my entire reality upside down within a matter of minutes. The heavy wooden door remained closed, an impenetrable barrier of luxury, but the words filtering through the microscopic cracks pierced my ears and stabbed directly into my soul, sharper than any surgical blade. As it turned out, 5 years of shared holidays, family dinners, intimate late-night conversations, and emotional vulnerability were nothing more than an elaborately staged corporate production, and I was simply the most naive, unsuspecting leading actress paying for my own destruction. Victoria's voice droned on, completely oblivious to the fact that her future daughter-in-law was standing mere inches away on the other side of the wood, absorbing every single devastating syllable. "Oh, and one more thing, Serafina," Victoria instructed, her voice tightening with operational authority. "Make sure Maddy sheds a few tears during her vows and at the reception tomorrow. Get her to talk extensively during her speech about how much Ethan saved her after her mother died, how he took care of her during her grief. We need both sides of the guest list, especially her high-profile tech executives, to view Ethan as a devoted, indispensable family man. It will do wonders for his networking." "I am Yaiki-yosha," Serafina giggled, a sound that made my skin crawl with visceral revulsion. "Don't worry, Mom. I have the timeline completely mapped out with the coordinator. During the toasts, I'm going to personally make sure her champagne glass is constantly refilled. Once she's got a few drinks in her, her guard drops completely, and she becomes a total pushover. She'll say whatever we want her to say." I shuddered, not from the physical chill of the San Francisco night, but from a profound, deep-seated disgust that reached the very core of my being. In that fraction of a second, something vital inside me shattered with absolute finality. It wasn't love that broke, it was my illusion. The foolish, desperate illusion that if I was just sincere enough, patient enough, generous and loving enough, I would finally be rewarded with the safe, decent family I had lost when my mother died. I closed my eyes tightly and took a deep, silent breath. No tears fell from my eyes. Perhaps my nervous system was in too deep a state of profound shock to process weeping. Or perhaps the sheer magnitude of the betrayal had instantly surpassed my biological threshold for crying, freezing my emotions into hard, unyielding crystal. Right then, my mind was entirely wiped clean of the agonizing question, why, and replaced with a single razor-sharp, crystal-clear directive, I have to save myself. I unzipped my designer purse with deliberate, silent precision. My hands were trembling violently, a physiological reaction to the adrenaline coursing through my veins, but my cognitive faculties were terrifyingly beautifully sharp. I pulled out my iPhone, swiped rapidly to bypass the lock screen, and hit the large red record button on my voice memo application. Quietly crouching down with the stealth of a shadow, I pressed the base of the phone right up against the bottom crack of the heavy oak door. The conversation inside dragged on, growing more shameless and predatory by the minute. "Once the marriage certificate is filed tomorrow, the trap snaps shut," Victoria chuckled darkly. "That girl is an absolute pushover when it comes to social decorum. She is terrified of public gossip and corporate scandal. Even if she discovers the account transfers later and wants to throw a tantrum, she won't dare make a scene publicly." "Exactly, Mom," Serafina chimed in, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "Everyone looking in from the outside just sees how aristocratic and generous our family is for welcoming an orphan into our circle. If she tries to demand a divorce after the wedding, the tech blogs and society pages will rip her apart, calling her an ungrateful, unstable brat." I listened to every single word, each sentence a brick cementing my new reality. My chest felt so tight I could barely draw oxygen, but my hand held the phone rock steady against the wood. 3 minutes passed, each second stretching out to feel like an entire century of agony. When I knew I had captured more than enough undeniable evidence to legally and socially dismantle their empire, I stopped the recording, saved the file under a secure cloud backup, and shoved the phone back into my purse. I stood up straight, smoothing down the front of my clothes. I was no longer shaking. The adrenaline had crystallized into an icy, unshakable lucidity. I was never going to walk through that door as their daughter-in-law. I spun around on my heel and walked briskly, powerfully back toward the elevator lobby. My heels struck the marble floor much louder than when I had arrived, each heavy step feeling as if I were deliberately stomping on the shattered, pathetic remnants of my own naive past. Inside the confines of the elevator, the mirrored walls offered a brutal confrontation. My face was a mask of pale ivory, my dusty rose lips pressed into a bloodless, razor-thin line. My eyes, which had been so full of anticipation just an hour ago, were completely hollow, frozen over with an icy numbness. I stared at my reflection, watching the manicured illusion of the perfect bride disintegrate in real time, and a dry, humorless laugh escaped my throat. It was a bitter, hollow sound that echoed off the glass panels. "Madelyn, you absolute fool," I thought to myself, the realization stinging worse than the betrayal itself. "You built an empire in the boardroom, but handed the keys to your life to a pack of wolves. But at least you woke up before the slaughter." The elevator doors slid open with a soft hiss, and I sprinted through the luxury lobby, ignoring the polite nod of the night doorman. I threw myself into the driver's seat of my car, slammed the door shut, and accelerated away from the curb. My car sped through the midnight streets of San Francisco, the iconic streetlights of the city blurring into faint, streaking halos of amber and white through the encroaching fog. The digital dashboard glowed with the time 11:45 p.m. In less than 8 hours, the world expected me to put on a show. It was only as I was crossing the threshold into the Mission District that the memory of my mother's coat hit me again. The charcoal gray cashmere coat, the one with the hand-woven ocean waves, was still sitting inside that penthouse apartment, resting on the velvet bench in their entryway. I gripped the leather steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, a fierce, agonizing internal tug-of-war raging inside my chest. I wanted to turn the car around. I desperately, viciously wanted to stomp back up to that penthouse, rip the coat from their hands, and curse them into oblivion. But as my foot hovered over the brake, a wave of profound nausea hit me. The mere thought of ringing that doorbell, of seeing Victoria's synthetic smile, or hearing Ethan's honeyed voice knowing the rot that lay beneath, made my stomach violently heave. I couldn't do it. "Forget it," I muttered into the empty car, my voice trembling but resolute. "I don't need it anymore. If that coat remains in that house for even another hour, it is already tainted." It wasn't tainted by physical dust or dirt. It was ruined by the toxic darkness of human greed. I couldn't wear a symbol of my mother's pure, selfless love after it had been breathed upon by monsters. I merged onto the lane, away from downtown, completely abandoning the route back to the luxury hotel in Napa, where my bridal suite was waiting, and drove straight to my small rented studio in the Mission. It was a modest 300-square-foot space, a tiny bedroom, and a living area that doubled as a kitchen that I had kept as a tax write-off and a personal creative sanctuary. It was small, utilitarian, and utterly devoid of the high-end pretense of Pacific Heights. But the moment I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the cool, familiar air greeted me like an old friend. It was the only place in the entire state of California where I felt truly safe right now. I flipped the light switch, and the sudden illumination made me gasp. Hanging from the industrial clothing rack in the center of the room, my pristine white haute couture wedding dress swayed slightly from the draft of the cracked window. The moonlight filtered through the glass, making the delicate hand-beaded tulle and Italian silk radiate a cold, ghost-like glow. It looked like a beautiful, breathtaking but incredibly fragile dream, a monument to a future that had died 20 minutes ago. I walked over to it, staring at the intricate lace details that had taken months to create. A sudden hysterical laugh broke from my lips. "Look at you," I whispered to the empty silk bodice, my voice cracking in the silence of the studio. "So beautiful, so absolutely stunning that you almost buried my entire life under your train." I turned away from the dress, unable to look at it for another second, and walked to the window, pushing the heavy velvet curtains aside. The dense San Francisco night wind blew in, carrying the damp, salty scent of the Pacific Ocean and the city streets. My chest felt constricted, as if an invisible iron band were tightening around my lungs. I needed something to ground me, something to stop the world from spinning. I pulled open the bottom drawer of my kitchen island and rummaged through the back until my fingers hit a familiar plastic square. It was a pack of cigarettes left over from my high-stress early days in tech before I had cleaned up my habits for Ethan's organic, health-conscious lifestyle. I hadn't smoked in 5 years, but tonight I needed a vice. I struck a match, the small flame illuminating the dark room, and lit it. The acrid smoke drifted into the air, stinging the corners of my eyes as I exhaled into the fog. Through the hazy gray clouds, old memories began to resurface, unbidden and agonizingly sharp. I remembered a night 4 years ago when Ethan's startup had lost its first major seed investor. He had sat on the floor of my apartment, his head in his hands looking so small and defeated. I had knelt beside him, rubbed his back, and told him we would get through it. He had looked up at me with tear-filled eyes and asked, "Maddy, if I stay broke forever, if I never make it in this city, will you look down on me? Will you leave me? D?" And I, with the painful, pathetic naivety of a woman in love, had laughed, kissed his forehead, and replied, "If we are poor, we will work hard together. I don't need a rich man, Ethan. I just need a decent one." Looking back from the vantage point of this smoky balcony, my own past words tasted like poison. I had been so blind. These people weren't poor in wealth. They were completely, utterly bankrupt in character. They didn't want a partner. They wanted a venture capitalist they could legally sleep with and emotionally enslave. Suddenly, the sharp vibration of my phone on the kitchen counter shattered the silence, snapping me violently back to reality. I walked over and looked down. Ethan's name and picture flashed brightly on the screen, a candid photo of him laughing on a beach in Maui that I had taken myself. I stared at it for what felt like an eternity, watching the phone buzz against the marble countertop, before I finally swiped the screen and brought it to my ear. "Maddy, babe, did you make it to the hotel yet?" Ethan's voice flowed through the speaker, as smooth, tender, and effortlessly comforting as it always was. "Why didn't you text me when you arrived? I've been worried sick staring at the fog." I leaned my back against the cool drywall of the kitchen, taking a slow drag of the cigarette. My voice, when I finally spoke, was so remarkably flat, calm, and detached that it surprised even me. The emotional turbulence of the highway had vanished, replaced by the icy precision I used when terminating underperforming contracts. "I'm not at the hotel, Ethan. I am at my studio in the Mission." There was a brief, almost imperceptible pause on the other end of the line, the sound of him shifting papers or moving away from someone. "The studio? What are you doing there, babe? You must be absolutely exhausted after visiting my mom. You need to be resting. Tomorrow is the biggest day of our lives." I almost laughed out loud, the smoke curling past my lips. Yeah, it was definitely an exhausting visit. Ethan let out a soft, boyish chuckle that used to make my heart melt, but now it only made my skin crawl. "Yeah, my mom can be a lot, but she absolutely adores you, Maddy. The second you walked out the door, she couldn't stop praising you. She kept saying how lucky I am to have a woman of your caliber. Tomorrow is going to be perfect." I watched the gray cigarette smoke dissipate into the dim lighting of the room, my eyes tracking its movement with absolute focus. "Ethan," I said slowly, emphasizing every syllable, "let me ask you a question." "Sure, babe, ask me anything. What's on your mind?" "Do you love me?" A heavy, suffocating silence stretched across the digital wire. It lasted for 3 seconds, but it felt like an admission of guilt. When Ethan finally spoke, there was a noticeable defensive edge to his forced laughter. "Maddy, what kind of question is that to ask out of the blue? It's midnight before our wedding. Of course I love you. Why else would I be standing at the altar tomorrow?" "Right," I answered, my voice dropping an octave completely devoid of inflection. "I was just wondering. Don't mind me. Don't overthink things, okay? Everyone gets pre-wedding jitters, especially a high-powered director like you who likes to control every variable," he said, trying to smooth it over with his usual patronizing charm. "Go to sleep early, okay? The cars are picking us up bright and early. I love you." "Okay," I said, and hung up the phone before he could reply. I tossed the device onto the fabric sofa. My heart didn't ache, it didn't race. It was just profoundly, beautifully numb. The 3-minute audio file sitting in my cloud storage was like a heavy block of ice, but it was the only thing keeping me anchored to reality, preventing me from collapsing under the weight of 5 years of wasted devotion. I turned my head to look at the wedding dress one last time, then scanned the perimeter of my tiny studio. Everything within these 4 walls had been built, funded, and earned with my own 2 hands. My career, my capital, my independence, my dreams, none of it belonged to the Brooks family. "It's okay," I whispered to myself, crushing the glowing amber ember of the cigarette into a ceramic tray. "Tomorrow might not be a wedding, but it will be the day I finally start living for myself." I lay down on the small bed, not bothering to change out of my clothes. I hardly slept that night. It wasn't because I was weeping, and it wasn't because the pain was unbearable. It was because my brain was operating at a terrifying level of corporate alertness. Every detail, every sentence, every calculated smirk from Victoria and Serafina played on a continuous slow-motion loop in my mind. When the first pale gray light of dawn began to slip through the window blinds, painting the studio in cold shades of ash, I sat up. I walked into the bathroom, splashed freezing water onto my face, and stared into the mirror. The woman looking back at me was different. The soft, accommodating romantic was dead. All that remained was a seasoned executive with absolute resolve. I walked over to my desk and opened the bottom drawer, pulling out a neatly organized stack of folders. I reviewed the deed to the Pacific Heights penthouse, my employment contracts, and the legal documentation for my mother's trust fund. My fingers brushed against the brown envelope containing the trust details, and a memory of my mother's weak voice in the hospital room echoed in my ears. Madelyn, keep this structure separate. Don't integrate it into your marital accounts until you are absolutely certain. I have a bad feeling about how eager Victoria is regarding your portfolio. At the time, I had brushed it off, telling her she was just being protective. Now I wished more than anything I could go back in time, hug her frail body, and beg for her forgiveness. I unlocked my phone, put in my earbuds, and forced myself to listen to the entire 3-minute recording one more time. Victoria's voice filled my skull, cold and predatory. How else were we supposed to get our hands on that Pacific Heights penthouse? When it finished, I pulled the buds out. There were no more excuses. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a hostile takeover. I changed into my battle armor, a crisp, tailored charcoal gray suit, a white silk button-down shirt, and my hair pulled back into a flawless, tight, low bun. No white silk, no bridal lace. This was the uniform of a woman stepping out to protect her empire. I brewed a cup of black coffee, letting the bitter liquid coat my tongue, and formulated my strategy. Step 1. Corporate termination of the contract. Step 2. Absolute communication blackout to prevent emotional manipulation. Step 3. Deploy legal artillery. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text from Serafina Maddy. Wake up, sleepyhead. Today, you become a Brooks. Can't wait to see you in that dress. I stared at the screen and let out a genuine sharp laugh. You'll be waiting a very long time, I whispered. I opened the text thread with Ethan. My thumb hovered over the keyboard for 3 seconds before I typed a message, devoid of emotion, punctuation, or room for negotiation. Ethan, the wedding is canceled. We are finished. Do not contact me. I hit send. The small blue delivered bubble popped up instantly. My heart skipped one massive heavy beat and then settled into a slow, rhythmic, terrifyingly steady pulse. A bizarre, intoxicating wave of relief washed over me as if a multi-ton boulder had been lifted off my spine. Within 10 seconds, my phone exploded. Ethan's name flashed continuously, followed by Victoria's, followed by Serafina's. The screen was a frantic, flashing mess of incoming calls and desperate text messages. I watched it calmly for a moment, reached over, and powered the device completely off. I didn't owe them an explanation, because they already knew exactly what they had done. I sat down at my desk, picked up my landline, and dialed a number I had memorized since childhood. Aunt Vivian, I said the moment the line picked up, my voice raspy but rock solid. I need your help. It's an emergency corporate and asset extraction. Aunt Vivian Sterling arrived at my Mission District studio just as the morning rush hour began to choke the streets of San Francisco. She looked exactly like the woman who had dominated corporate litigation and high-asset divorce cases for 3 decades, dressed in a sharp-tailored navy pantsuit, her silver-streaked hair secured in a flawless twist, and her expression completely unreadable. Yet, the moment her eyes locked onto mine, the fierce professional exterior softened with an undercurrent of profound maternal warmth. She dropped her heavy leather briefcase onto my small dining table, scanned the room, and let her gaze linger for a few seconds on the white couture wedding dress hanging like a ghost in the corner. "Are you holding up Madelyn?" she asked, her voice rich, steady, and commanding. I offered her a faint but remarkably stable smile. It wasn't the shattered, trembling smile of the girl who had crouched outside a penthouse door 12 hours ago, but the cold, calculating smile of a director who had just identified a critical system failure. I've never been clearer in my life, Aunt Vivian. The metrics are simple. The partnership is dead.
Basco Emma Chadaid.
She didn't waste time asking pointless emotional questions or offering hollow platitudes. She pulled out a chair, sat down at the table, and opened her legal pad, clicking her Mont Blanc pen with a sharp, authoritative snap. Start from the absolute beginning. Give me every transaction, every timeline, and every syllable. Do not leave anything out. I laid out the entire blueprint of the betrayal. I told her about the forgotten cashmere coat, the midnight drive to Pacific Heights, and the exact sequence of voices filtering through the crack of the oak door. Then I slid my iPad across the table and played the 3-minute audio recording. In the quiet sanctuary of my studio, Victoria's and Serafina's voices echoed with chilling clarity, their predatory laughter slicing through the morning air. Vivian listened intently, her posture rigid, her eyes narrowing slightly with every passing second. When the recording finished and the audio fell silent, she let out a long, slow exhale through her teeth. "You are incredibly lucky, Maddy," she said, her voice dropping into a lethal, quiet register. "Lucky that you forgot that coat, and even luckier that you had the presence of mind to hit record instead of letting your emotions dictate your actions. This file completely shifts the leverage." I let out a dry, hollow laugh, leaning against the kitchen counter. I never imagined the people I considered my family for 5 years could view me as nothing more than a series of liquidable assets. I feel like an absolute fool. "Life hands us incredibly expensive lessons, kiddo," Vivian replied, looking up at me over her reading glasses. "But the ultimate price is only paid if you refuse to learn from them. Right now, we transition from defense to offense. Let me lay out the 3 ironclad rules for what comes next. Rule number 1, you do not fold under any circumstances. That family is going to deploy every psychological manipulation tactic in the book. They will cry, they will blame you, they will gaslight you, and they will threaten you. Their sole objective right now is to make you cave before the legal paperwork is filed." I nodded, my jaw tightening. Understood. I'm already numb to their theater. "Rule number 2, Vivian continued, tapping her pen against the legal pad for emphasis. "You do not hand over a single original document or digital password for any asset currently in your name, regardless of what emergencies they manufacture. And rule number 3, from this exact microsecond forward, you do not speak to them alone. All communication happens with me present, or it goes directly through my firm's office. You are officially behind my shield." Dum. To demonstrate her point, the screen of my landline phone on the desk suddenly began to flash, breaking the silence with a loud, aggressive ring. The caller ID displayed the Brooks family penthouse number. I looked at Vivian, and she gave me a sharp, decisive nod. "Answer it. Let's let them show their hand, but put it on speakerphone." I walked over, pressed the button, and took a deep breath. Madelyn, where the hell are you?" Ethan's voice erupted from the speaker, completely stripped of its usual boyish charm and gentle cadence. He sounded frantic, breathless, and deeply agitated, his tone laced with a volatile mix of panic and anger. "Do you have any idea what kind of psychotic stunt you're pulling right now? The caterers are at the Napa estate. The guests are calling my phone, and you send me a text message saying the wedding is canceled. Are you completely out of your mind?" I looked at Vivian, who remained perfectly still, her eyes locked on me like a hawk. I kept my voice entirely flat, channeling the exact tone I used when firing a toxic vendor. "I am at my studio, Ethan, and my text was not a stunt. The wedding is off. We are done." "Because of what?" Ethan barked, his voice cracking with desperation. "Tell me. You can't just be this fundamentally unreasonable." "Maddy, you owe me an explanation. You owe my family an explanation." "Unreasonable." I let out a sharp, cold laugh that cut through the wire. "Do you honestly want to hear the reason, Ethan? Do you want me to articulate it for you?" "Yes, damn it, I want to hear it," he roared. Instead of responding verbally, I reached over to my iPad, brought the microphone close to the landline base, and hit play on the voice memo. Instantly, Victoria's distinct aristocratic voice filled the air. The way that girl smiles makes my stomach turn. How else were we supposed to get our hands on that Pacific Heights penthouse? Followed immediately by Serafina's malicious giggles about selling the property for his incubator. The other end of the line went dead silent. The only sound returning through the speaker was the heavy, erratic, and terrified breathing of a man who had just watched his entire facade disintegrate into ash. The suffocating silence stretched across the telephone wire for what felt like an eternity before Ethan finally stammered, his confidence completely shattered into pathetic fragments. "Maddy, look, let me explain that. You have this completely wrong. My mom was just drinking wine and talking complete nonsense. That's not how I feel about you at all. You're blowing a private family conversation completely out of proportion." Am I asked, my voice cutting through his stuttering like a scalpel. "What about the title deed to my penthouse? What about liquidating my mother's trust fund to buy Serafina a Range Rover? What about getting me drunk at my own reception so I would be easier to manipulate? Was that all just wine talk, Ethan? Or was it the actual business plan for our marriage?" "Maddy, just listen to me for 1 second. Ethan's voice rose in pitched desperation, bleeding into raw anger as he realized his grip on my life was slipping away. "You're ruining everything over a stupid misunderstanding. The wedding is entirely paid for. The venture capitalists, the corporate executives are friends. Everyone is on their way to Napa. If you pull out now, you are publicly humiliating me. You are humiliating my mother, and you are destroying our reputation." I smirked, a wave of pure, unadulterated disgust washing over me. "And did you or your mother ever stop to think that by letting you walk down that altar, I would be losing my entire life, my fortune, and my sanity?" Ethan fell dead silent, unable to formulate a single corporate defense. But before he could speak again, the phone on his end was violently snatched away, and Victoria's voice hijacked the line, her sweet, honeyed facade completely gone, replaced by a sharp, venomous authority. "Madelyn, honey, do not listen to a silly illegal recording and jump to ridiculous conclusions," Victoria said, her voice trembling slightly with hidden fury. "I only said those things because I am deeply invested in your future financial security with Ethan. I have always treated you like my own flesh and blood, like a real daughter." I looked out the window, watching the morning sun finally break through the heavy San Francisco mist, illuminating the brick buildings of the Mission in blinding bright clarity. "Victoria," I said slowly, letting her name hang in the air like a condemnation. "You can stop the performance now. The curtain fell last night. I heard everything." "What is that supposed to mean?" Victoria's tone skyrocketed into pure, unhinged venom, her aristocratic mask slipping entirely to reveal the predator underneath. "You ungrateful little brat! Who do you think you are talking to? We welcomed an orphan into our family, we gave you status, and you repay us by spying on us and calling off a high society wedding over gossip." I took a deep, steadying breath, feeling no pain, only an immense sense of power. "I am talking to you with the absolute truth, and the wedding isn't the only thing that's over." At that exact moment, Aunt Vivian leaned forward, pulling the phone base toward her. When she spoke, her voice was smooth, elegant, and absolutely lethal, the tone of a Supreme Court assassin. "Good morning, Victoria. This is Vivian Sterling, senior partner at Sterling & Associates. As of 5 a.m. this morning, I have been retained as permanent legal counsel for Madelyn Vance." The line went completely, utterly quiet on the other end, the name of one of the city's most feared asset protection lawyers striking them like a physical blow. "Moving forward," Vivian continued, her voice clipping every word with icy precision, "any and all communication regarding Miss Vance, her properties, or her financial portfolio will go directly through my office downtown. Any further attempts at contact, emotional harassment, or defamation against my client will be fully documented and prosecuted to the maximum extent of California law. Furthermore, we are currently reviewing the extensive financial ledger of transactions between my client and your family over the past 5 years. I suggest you retain a very good defense attorney, Victoria. You're going to need one." It took a long time before Ethan's voice returned to the line, sounding incredibly small, defeated, and shrunken, stripping away every ounce of the tech founder arrogance he had carried for half a decade. "Maddy, do you really want to take our relationship this far, to turn 5 years of love into a legal war? A schwa..." I stared dead at the blinking lights of the phone, my heart beating in a slow, perfect, triumphal rhythm. "I am not taking it too far, Ethan. I am simply stopping a theft right where it needs to be stopped." With a deliberate movement, I reached over and ended the call, cutting the connection with absolute finality. The room returned to silence, but it was no longer the heavy, suffocating silence of the night before. It was the crisp, clean, incredibly relieving quiet that follows a massive, destructive thunderstorm washing the world clean. Aunt Vivian looked up at me from her legal pad, a rare, unmistakable hint of pride shining in her sharp eyes. "You did excellently, Maddy," she said, tapping her pen. "Now let's get to the real work. You mentioned they owe you money." I slumped back into my chair, letting out a long, deep sigh of pure liberation. "Aunt Vivian, I'm not nearly as devastated as I thought I would be, because I woke up before the trap snapped shut. But over the last 5 years, Ethan's family has treated my bank account like their personal line of credit. They have borrowed a massive amount of capital from me for emergencies and investments. I want every single cent of it back." Vivian smiled a predatory, brilliant look that signaled trouble for the Brooks family. "Pull all the digital receipts, bank statements, and wire transfer logs. Separate the principal from the interest. Give me the paper trail." I stood up, walked over to my filing cabinet, and pulled out a heavy folder of printed bank statements. "Thank God I kept a meticulous paper trail for my tax write-offs," I muttered. Vivian took the papers, her smile widening. "That's not just luck, Maddy. That's you being smarter than the people who tried to hunt you." Outside, San Francisco was fully awake people rushing to their corporate jobs, still believing in perfect facades. But inside this tiny studio, the counterattack had officially begun. With the landline finally silent, the modest studio in the Mission District transformed into a makeshift war room. Aunt Vivian spread out the 5 heavy manila folders I had pulled from my steel filing cabinet, her manicured fingers moving across the pages with the surgical precision of a financial auditor. The morning sun poured through the high windows, cutting through the leftover haze of my cigarette smoke and casting a harsh, unyielding light onto thousands of lines of transactional data. For the past 5 years, I had been operating under the classic delusion of a woman who believed her professional success should naturally bankroll her partner's life. Every time Ethan encountered a cash crunch, every time Victoria faced an unexpected medical copay, and every time Serafina forgot her university tuition deadline, I had stepped in with my phone, opened my Chase banking application, and authorized a seamless wire transfer. Back then, I called it an investment in our collective future. Looking at the statements now through the lens of cold reality, it looked like a systematic parasitic extraction. "Let's look at the patterns, Madelyn," Vivian said, her reading glasses resting on the bridge of her nose as she highlighted line after line with a bright yellow marker. "Silicon Valley is full of founders who use their partners as zero-interest banks, but the Brooks family turned it into an art form. Fortunately for us, you didn't just Venmo them pocket money. These are substantial, documented banking wires." I pulled up a stool next to her, staring down at a transfer from 3 years ago. "There," I pointed to a line item, $50,000 wired directly to Ethan's corporate account for his startup, Omnia AI. He told me it was a bridge loan because his Series A funding was delayed by a week. He swore on his life that the moment the venture capital cleared, he would return the principal to my savings account. "Did he?" Vivian asked, not looking up from her pad. "No," I replied, my voice hard. When I asked him about it 3 months later, he got incredibly defensive. He twisted it around, saying that keeping track of debts between 2 people who were planning to share a bed for the rest of their lives was petty and transactional. He made me feel so incredibly guilty for even bringing up the math that I dropped it entirely. "Classic emotional manipulation to evade a debt liability," Vivian muttered, writing a note on her legal pad. "But here's what he forgot on the wire memo line you typed, bridge loan, Omnia AI, to be reimbursed. That is a documented written intent of a loan, not a gift. In the state of California, that memo line combined with his text confirmation acknowledging the receipt of the loan gives us significant teeth in civil court." She turned the page, her marker bleeding through the thin paper, as she found another major bleeding artery in my finances. "And what about this one $15,000 to Victoria Brooks, March of last year?" A wave of bitter recognition washed over me. Victoria called me in tears while Ethan was on a business trip in Austin. She claimed she had an urgent uncovered dental and cardiac emergency at a private clinic in Stanford. She said she was too embarrassed to ask Ethan for the money because his startup was stressed, and she begged me to keep it a secret between the 2 of us. She promised she would liquidate some of her mutual funds to pay me back by the summer. Let me guess. Vivian looked up, her eyes flashing with a dangerous amusement. The summer came and went, and her mutual funds were suddenly locked in a long-term capital gains freeze. Exactly, I said, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. And then 2 weeks later, she showed up at a family dinner wearing a brand-new diamond tennis bracelet, bragging about how her investments had finally paid off. I was so caught up in trying to be the perfect, accommodating future daughter-in-law that I chose to believe her lies, rather than face the terrifying truth that I was being systematically robbed. Vivian reached over, placing her hand firmly over mine. Her skin was warm, a stark contrast to the icy coldness that had settled into my bones. Stop beating yourself up, Madelyn. You didn't lose that money because you were stupid. You lost it because you possessed a capacity for empathy that they completely lacked. They weaponized your decency against you. But the beautiful thing about a paper trail is that it doesn't care about empathy. It only cares about math. For the next 3 hours, we meticulously itemized 24 separate transactions spread out over half a decade. There was the $25,000 for Serafina's final semester at Berkeley, which she claimed she needed because her financial aid package fell through at the last second. There were multiple $5,000 transfers to Victoria for home maintenance on her rental properties in Oakland. When Vivian finally added up the numbers on her digital calculator, the final sum flashed in bright red numbers across the screen. $150,000, exactly. $150,000 of your hard-earned liquid capital completely absorbed by 3 people who treated you like an unregistered ATM, Vivian stated, slamming the folder shut with a sound that felt like a gavel striking a block. They thought they were being incredibly clever, sneaking these amounts out under the guise of family emergencies, confident that the impending marriage would legally dissolve the distinction between your assets and theirs. But because the wedding is canceled, these transactions remain outstanding liabilities. I stood up, walking back to the window, watching the bright California sun fully illuminate the bustling streets below. Can we actually get it back, Aunt Vivian? Or are they going to file for bankruptcy and tie me up in litigation for the next 5 years? Vivian stood up beside me, her posture radiating the supreme confidence of a predator who had never lost a courtroom battle. They won't file for bankruptcy, Maddy. Ethan's startup is currently pitching to top-tier venture firms on Sand Hill Road for a major valuation. If a formal civil lawsuit for fraud and unpaid corporate debt is filed against him and his company today, it will trigger an automatic material adverse change clause in his investment term sheets. The venture capitalists will drop him like a radioactive stone. He will pay us every single cent just to keep this out of the public record. By 2 p.m., the tranquil environment of my studio had officially morphed into a high-stakes corporate legal headquarters. Vivian sat at her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she drafted a formal demand letter, a legal document that was essentially a highly polished, terrifyingly precise financial declaration of war. The letter didn't contain a single ounce of emotional fluff. It didn't mention the broken hearts, the ruined wedding dress, or the wasted 5 years. Instead, it listed 24 distinct annexes, each containing a stamped bank wire receipt, a corresponding text message, screenshot from Ethan Victoria or Serafina promising repayment, and a calculated interest rate adjusted for inflation under California civil codes. I am giving them exactly 24 hours to wire the full balance of $150,000 into my firm's escrow account, Vivian explained, showing me the screen. If the funds are not cleared by 2 p.m. tomorrow, my associate will file a concurrent twin lawsuit, one against Ethan's corporation for unpaid commercial debt, and one against Victoria and Serafina individually for civil theft and unjust enrichment. We will also CC his lead angel investors on the filing. I looked at the document, my name, Madelyn Vance, printed at the top in a bold, authoritative font. For years, I had used my signature to authorize product launches, sign vendor agreements, and approve multi-million-dollar budgets for big tech. Tonight, using that same signature to protect my own life felt like the ultimate act of alignment. I took the heavy pen from Vivian's hand and signed the bottom of the authorization form with a sharp, aggressive stroke. "Send it," I said, my voice completely steady. Vivian smiled a sharp, brilliant expression. She attached the PDF file, printed out 3 physical copies for a professional process server to tarnish their doorstep with, and hit the send button. Within exactly 20 minutes of the email hitting Ethan's inbox, my landline phone began to ring again. The caller ID didn't say the Brooks penthouse this time. It was Ethan's personal cell phone number. I looked at Vivian. She checked her watch, leaned back in her chair, and nodded. "Answer it. Let's see how fast a Silicon Valley alpha founder collapses when you threaten his funding." I pressed the speaker button. "Madelyn!" Ethan's voice came through, but the volatile rage from this morning had completely evaporated. He sounded utterly exhausted, desperate, and visibly terrified, the smooth cadence of his tech-pitch voice replaced by a pathetic, shaky tremor. "Maddy, please. I am begging you. Let's talk about this like 2 rational adults. My lead investor just called me asking why a prominent family law firm is running a forensic background check on my corporate bank account. You're going to completely destroy my company before we even launch." I leaned over the desk, my hands planted firmly on the wood, staring at the spinning digital timer of the call. "Your company isn't my concern anymore, Ethan. My concern is the $150,000 your family systematically stole from my savings account over the last 5 years." "It wasn't stealing," Ethan stammered, his voice cracking as he tried to find a legal loophole that didn't exist. "We were a family, Maddy. We were building a life together. I was going to pay you back the moment our Series A cleared. You know how brutal the startup ecosystem is in San Francisco right now. I just needed a little breathing room. If you were building a life with me, Ethan, you wouldn't have been plotting with your mother to strip my name from my penthouse title deed while I was driving home in the fog." I countered, each word hitting the wire like a heavy steel hammer. "You wouldn't have been planning to liquidate my mother's legacy to buy your sister a luxury car. You didn't want a wife, Ethan. You wanted an angel investor you could manipulate into silence." "Maddy, please," he whispered, and I could hear the faint, muffled sound of Victoria crying or arguing in the background of his apartment. $150,000 cash in 24 hours is impossible. We don't have that kind of liquid capital sitting around. Most of my assets are tied up in corporate equity. My mom's properties are leveraged. Give me 6 months. Give me until the end of the fiscal quarter. I swear I will get you the money." Vivian reached over, pressing the microphone button on her console, her voice cutting through his frantic excuses like an Arctic blast. "Mr. Brooks, this is Vivian Sterling. Let me make something abundantly clear to you because your cognitive faculties seem to be failing you under stress. We are not negotiating a payment plan. We are giving you an ultimatum. You have exactly 23 hours and 40 minutes left. If that money is not in my firm's account, the filings become public record at the San Francisco County Clerk's office. Your venture capital funding will evaporate your corporate reputation in this city, will be permanently radioactive, and your mother will be defending herself against civil fraud charges." "You're going to ruin my life over a family squabble," Ethan cried out, his voice full of a pathetic, weak fury. "You ruined your own life the second you mistook Madelyn's generosity for weakness," Vivian responded coldly. "The clock is ticking, Mr. Brooks. I suggest you start calling your wealthy friends for a hard money loan." She cut the connection before he could utter another syllable. I stood up, walked over to the kitchen counter, and poured myself a glass of iced water. My hands weren't shaking anymore. The adrenaline had completely stabilized into a profound, beautiful sense of calm. I looked over at the white wedding dress hanging in the corner, its intricate lace catching the afternoon light. It no longer looked like a tragedy. It looked like a bullet I had successfully dodged. I was $150,000 poorer in my bank statement today, but by tomorrow afternoon, I would be entirely free. By 1:30 p.m. the following afternoon, my small studio in the Mission District had fallen into a heavy, expectant silence. The frantic ringing of the telephone had finally ceased, replaced by the low, steady hum of the refrigerator and the distant, muffled sounds of traffic navigating Valencia Street below. Aunt Vivian sat perfectly still at my dining table, her laptop open, her eyes locked onto the refresh button of her firm's secure escrow account page. I stood by the kitchen island, a fresh mug of black coffee cradled in my hands. I hadn't touched a cigarette since the previous night. The artificial anchor was no longer necessary. The frantic manic energy that had kept my brain firing at 1,000,000 miles an hour for the past 48 hours had dissolved, leaving behind a deep, hollow, but incredibly clean sense of calm. 10 minutes until the deadline, Madelyn, Vivian said, her voice cutting through the quiet room like a low chime. She didn't look worried. In her line of work, she had stared down some of the most ruthless hedge fund managers and tech billionaires in the state. A desperate, over-leveraged founder like Ethan Brooks was barely a blip on her radar. "Do you think he'll actually pull it off?" I asked, taking a slow sip of the bitter coffee. "When a man's entire ego reputation and multi-million-dollar tech dream are placed on the chopping block, he will find a way to bleed money," Vivian replied, her fingers tapping a slow, rhythmic pattern against the aluminum casing of her laptop. "Ethan knows that if those documents hit the public clerk's office at 2 p.m., he is effectively exiled from the Silicon Valley ecosystem. No VC firm on Sand Hill Road will touch a founder embroiled in a predatory asset-stripping lawsuit with his ex-fiancée. He would be dead in the water." As the digital clock on my microwave shifted to 1:55 p.m., a sharp crystalline chime echoed from Vivian's computer. Vivian's tapping fingers stopped instantly. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing, as she reviewed the encrypted notification flashing across her screen. A slow, razor-sharp smile spread across her face, the smile of a general watching the enemy lines completely collapse on the battlefield. "It's cleared," she announced, turning the laptop screen toward me. $150,000 wired in full from a secondary personal credit line, registered under Ethan Brooks and co-signed by Victoria Brooks. The funds are currently sitting in our escrow account, fully locked and verified. I walked over, staring at the digital receipt. The bright green letters read, "Transaction successful. Wire transfer received." I looked at the numbers tracking the zeros, and a sudden, unexpected sensation washed over me. I expected to feel a massive surge of triumph, a desire to scream or laugh or toast to my victory. Instead, I felt absolutely nothing but a profound, beautiful vacuum. The money was back in my possession, but its return simply marked the formal erasure of a 5-year mistake. It was the exact price of my freedom, calculated down to the very last cent. "We need to execute the final paperwork," Vivian said, pulling a fresh document from her briefcase. "This is a mutual non-disclosure and release agreement. It states that you have received full satisfaction of all outstanding debts, and in exchange, both parties agree to a permanent, legally binding communication blackout. You don't speak about them. They don't dare breathe your name. If they violate this, the audio recording goes public instantly." I took the heavy Mont Blanc pen from her hand. My signature this time was fluid, elegant, and entirely unhurried. With a few strokes of black ink, I officially severed the final legal and financial cords connecting my life to the Brooks family. "It's over, kiddo," Vivian said softly, closing her laptop and packing her folders back into her leather briefcase. She stood up, walking over to me, and wrapped her arms around my shoulders in a tight, protective hug. "Your mother would be so incredibly proud of you today, Maddy. You didn't just survive the storm, you out-engineered it." "Thank you, Aunt Vivian," I whispered. My voice thick with a sudden surge of genuine emotion, "for everything." After Vivian left, the studio felt incredibly spacious, as if the physical dimensions of the room had expanded the moment the legal battle concluded. I walked over to the corner of the room where the $15,000 haute couture wedding dress still hung from the metal rack. In the bright afternoon sun, the white silk and intricate beadwork no longer looked magical or romantic. It looked like a museum artifact, a beautiful, expensive relic of a life I was never meant to live. I pulled out my phone, opened an app, and scheduled a private courier service. Within an hour, a courier arrived at my door. I handed him the heavy garment bag containing the dress, along with a sticky note addressed to a luxury bridal consignment shop in downtown San Francisco. "Sell it," the note read. "Donate 100% of the proceeds to the San Francisco Women's Shelter." I didn't want a single dollar from that dress back in my bank account. I wanted it entirely scrubbed from my reality. When the courier walked out the door, taking the final vestige of my failed wedding with him, I walked over to the small balcony and stepped outside. The heavy, suffocating fog that had choked San Francisco for the past 48 hours had completely broken apart, driven away by a sharp, crisp breeze coming off the Pacific Ocean. The city lay before me in blinding, sharp focus the steep hills of Pacific Heights, the glittering blue expanses of the bay, and the bustling tech hubs of Soma. I leaned against the railing, taking a deep, unconstrained breath of the salty air, feeling my lungs expand fully for the first time in 5 years. I had lost a fiancé, a mother-in-law, a sister-in-law, and the idealized future I thought I had secure. But as I looked out over the sprawling, beautiful city, I realized I hadn't actually lost anything at all. My career was intact, my multi-million-dollar penthouse was safe, my mother's trust fund was untouched, and most importantly, my absolute independence and self-respect were completely ironclad. The Brooks family had set a trap for an unsuspecting grieving girl, confident that her desire for love would make her a compliant victim. But they had failed to realize that beneath the soft, accommodating exterior lay a woman forged in the competitive fires of Silicon Valley, a woman who knew exactly how to calculate risks, protect assets, and dismantle a threat. I smiled a genuine, radiant, and incredibly powerful smile that reached all the way to my eyes. The wedding was canceled, the illusion was dead, and the smoke had finally cleared. I turned back into my quiet, sunlit studio, closing the door behind me, ready to finally start writing the first chapter of my own uncompromised life.